Kelly Brenner, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
So you are a very interesting person. And I say that because I've been following you on Twitter now for almost a year, and you've published some really cool tweets, mostly related to nature, to what you found in nature, to the fact that you've written a book that I actually ended up buying because of your Twitter account. And so I'm just curious, you're a writer. Is that what you do for a living?
Yes, you could call it that.
Okay, and what kind of content do you write?
Well, the book, and then I do a little bit of freelance writing, and then I also have my own website where I write a field journal and then just various articles on different natural history topics. And then that's partly supported by a Patreon account that I have.
Okay, and see, this is one of the reasons why I said you're very interesting is because you're not just interesting because you're a naturalist and you write about nature, but just the fact that you do this full time, you are active online, you help people learn about science, about nature and things like that. I find that absolutely fascinating. So I want to get started and I want to find out like how did you even get into this field?
Well, it's interesting. So when I was little, of course, I was into nature because most kids are at that age. I was lucky enough to have some property up in the Columbia River Gorge between Oregon and Washington, and we spent a lot of time up there, in childhood, catching bugs and snakes and stuff. So that was always with me. And then when I decided to go to school, I got a degree in landscape architecture. And instead of learning how to design, like campuses and things that I thought were kind of boring, I focused more on urban habitat and how to design habitat to attract nature to the city, where people live. But when I graduated, it was 2006, and so nobody was hiring. In fact, most of the firms were laying people off. So I started writing about that interest instead, and it just kind of blossomed from there.
Okay, and so essentially, as you said, you started exploring in nature when you were a kid. Did you have a tree house?
No, we didn't. We we had I had a city yard which didn't have a whole lot, but up at our property we had we took our trailer up there every summer and spent the summer up there, and we had I don't think you have them in your part of the country, but vine maples. When vine maples grow in the wild, they kind of sprout from the trunk, the base, into several different really long. And they don't sprout up; they kind of sprout out. So you can jump on them, and they don't break because they're very bendy. And so, I mean, we had a kind of a natural tree house, I guess.
Cool. And this is in the Seattle region?
Yeah, this is in down on the Columbia River Gorge, so between Oregon and Washington, kind of to the east of the Pacific, is the gorge, which was created by the floods, the Missoula floods, back in the time of the glaciers, and it kind of sculpted out a whole this big landscape of the Columbia River Gorge. So it's a kind of a really magical place to get to explore.
Wow, that sounds really cool. And so I guess you've always been in that area. Yeah. Have you ever lived elsewhere in the United States?
No, just Portland area, and then I went to school down in the Willamette Valley in Eugene, which is a completely different ecosystem, and then up here to Seattle, which is different again. So it's all the same region, but it's all pretty different sorts of habitats to live in. So, but yeah,
That's
just the
interesting.
Northwest.
Okay. So you do document a lot about the nature in your area in the Northwest. Do you also document nature or creatures when you travel?
Yes. Last year, before all this pandemic stuff, we got to go to Finland, which I love. It's one of my favorite countries. And yeah, I wrote on my blog every day that I went. I did like a little mini solo tour of some of the national parks there, and I spent a day at each park by myself, just wandering around and then taking copious amounts of pictures. And then I wrote on that on my blog too. So I keep a field journal on my blog, so it's not just local, but also whenever I travel, I always document that too.
Do you want to share the name and the URL for your blog?
Yeah, it's metrofieldguide.com, METRO, like metropolitan. Yeah, so metrofieldguide.com.
Okay. Very cool. And I also understand that you're a photographer.
Yeah, yeah, I
You
was.
want to tell me a bit about that?
Well, that started way back in high school, many, many years ago. I was doing the photography for yearbook and just got interested in cameras. And it just kind of escalated from there.
And of course, you photograph nature.
Yeah, yeah. I have a macro lens, which is my most commonly used lens. It works also, it's 200 millimeters, so it works really well for birds too. But by far, what I focus on most of is invertebrates. So I take it. I never go to the beach without it. I always take it to the beach, the bugs in the backyard, um, slime molds, anything. I love the tiny things to photograph. And then I recently got an underwater kind of point and shoot camera, so I've been experimenting with that now too in my pond and at the beach.
Very cool. And I know that you've written for some publications. I've read your bio online. But with photography and a talent for writing, it also really translates well to just doing it yourself online, don't you find?
Yeah, yeah. And when I do freelancing, or if somebody interviews me, my photographs often go with those pieces too. But it's also very useful for my own website to have not just like the field journals, but also when I write about something. Like I have a series about urban plants, profiles for urban plants, and I just happen to have a catalog of thousands of photos, and I tag them. Everything is documented meticulously about where I saw it, what it is, so I can find it again. Um, and so I use them, yeah, a lot on my website for different various uses, or just reference photos, or yeah, there's countless things I do with my photos.
Yeah, and I guess one of the things I want to talk about just real quick here before we get to your book and asking you a bunch of questions about nature itself, I am curious again about this ability that you've had to translate this into an online career of sorts. Do you do you find it difficult to do this? Do you find it difficult to, you know, find the discipline or the right habits to, to do your own content, to write your own books? I mean, writing a book is a huge endeavor. I know.
Yeah.
I've started working on one, and it is hard.
Yeah, it'd be much easier to just have a simple job, like I used to have in an office years ago, because writing a book is one thing, but it really doesn't bring in much money. Well, nothing I do brings in much money, to be honest. But I don't know. I guess I'm a creator and I just like to have different things. And I have an idea and I'm like, I want to do that. And so I feel like I often space myself a little bit too thin sometimes. I've got these Invertefest going. I've got a Nudibranch Appreciation Society. I've got my website. I've got two other books I'm trying to research. Yeah, it gets a bit, especially now, it gets a bit overwhelming to figure out where to focus my energy on any given day.
So you've got a lot on the go then.
Yeah.
Did you grow up in a family that encouraged you to be self-sufficient or to, to pursue your interests and your hobbies?
It's a good question. I don't know. I mean, they didn't tell me to, like, shoot for my dreams or anything. It was much more practical family than that, I think. Um, so no, not entirely. I think that was mostly my own, probably my autistic mind. Do what I want.
Yeah, I think we can relate on that one, I'm pretty sure. Okay, so let's move beyond that then. The nature. I have a bunch of questions because I see a lot of posts on Twitter. Again, your posts are fantastic. Do you want to share the name of your Twitter account?
Oh yeah, it's just my name, Kelly Brenner. Easy.
Excellent. Quick question. What is a slime mold?
Slime molds are very tricky. They're not related to anything else. They are their own kingdom, and so they're not fungus. They're not animal, which a lot of the old explorers thought they were at the beginning. They thought they were animal because they move. So they're their own little kingdom, and they function very similarly to a fungus. But they in their growth stage, the plasmodium, they grow, and they don't just like grow like a tree where they sprout out the top. They actively move. So when they eat up the food in one part of a log, they just keep oozing across it. And then when they mature, they turn into something that is similar in shape to a mushroom. Um, it often has a stalk and then like an orb on the top. And then when it dries out, it opens up, and the spores are released into a new generation of slime molds.
So if you were to describe it for our listeners, what does a slime mold actually look like?
If it's in the growth stage, it's usually white or yellow, slimy, and lots of tendrils kind of creeping across. But we don't see that form very often because it's usually under leaves or under bark. They're very small generally, and they mostly go overlooked, which is why I carry a little pocket flashlight with me all the time, especially in the forest, because they like to grow in the dark forest. And they're small. They can either be like little orbs, and they usually grow in a big clump of a big mass, the same kind altogether. They can be yellow, they can be white, translucent. Some are iridescent, like blue, and some look like little champagne flutes. Their forms are very different, and when their spores explode, it's kind of like little fireworks. Um, and some are bright pink. I mean, they're very diverse, but they're all very, very small, and very much overlooked.
When you say spores, does this mean that they're related to mushrooms?
No, they're not related. They just have a similar growth form where they, shoot off spores. But so do ferns. A lot of different things that are unrelated produce spores and different sorts of life cycles.
Okay, and I just want to be clear for everybody, you're not a scientist. You just happen to know all this stuff because you researched it, right?
Right, right. Yeah, no, I call myself a naturalist. So I don't have a science degree. I have, yeah, just spent a lot of time out in nature, observing, documenting, reading, researching. Yep,
You're kind of you remind me a bit of Jane Goodall before she, you know, I read that she had been selected to go research chimpanzees because I forget his name, the man who chose her. I
I
forget
don't
his
know.
name.
Yeah.
But he chose her to go study chimpanzees, not because she was a scientist. She wasn't. She was actually just an administrator. But she
Hmm.
had this meticulous way of of doing notation and researching her subjects. And he found that very very interesting. And so he sent her to research chimpanzees. And now, I mean, look at her now.
Right, right.
So I find it very interesting that she also started out as a naturalist. So a naturalist, just for to be clear with people, is not a categorically a scientist, but is someone who happens to know a lot about nature. Would
Right, it's
that
just
be
somebody,
correct?
yeah, somebody who just studies nature as a whole. And as science, I mean, like back in the old days, you think of like Darwin and all the early explorers, they were, I mean, they were naturalists. They studied a whole range of things. They weren't just focused on one specific thing. Um, but science now is so compartmentalized. It's like you study not just rotifers, but one little aspect of it. And so scientists don't often see the big picture, where I think ecologists and naturalists tend to see the patterns in nature. They tend to see all the connections and like kind of the big picture. So I think it's an important field, even though it's not an official, science, for people to, undertake.
100% agree with you. It is a definitely something that is often overlooked is the studying of the big picture.
Hmm.
So this is exactly what you've described it as, and I'm glad that you mentioned ecologists in there too.
Yeah, and a lot of my landscape architecture degree, I focus on ecology because you want the big picture. You don't want to just design it for chipmunks or squirrels or whatever, but you need to create a habitat that's going to encompass the whole ecosystem. You attract one thing, it's not a very good ecosystem because you need to have that big picture of all the different how everything interacts together. And I mean, you don't have trees for squirrels, then you're not going to have the food source. So you have to think of all those different pieces.
I actually like that you had a chapter on that in your book about how everything is connected.
Hmm.
That was that was really good. Before I get to that, though, I wanted to ask you, and I think you've pronounced it differently than how I've been pronouncing it my whole life. You, I pronounce this word nudibranch, but it's not, is it?
Yeah, it's nudibranch.
Nudibranch. See, this is
Yeah.
what happens when you're a voracious reader, but you never actually have to say the word.
Yep. No, I have this. I've been terrified that during all my book talks and interviews that I'm going to say things wrong because I hardly ever talk out loud.
That's funny. Can you explain to us what is a nudibranch?
Nudibranchs are the coolest creatures in the world. They're you wouldn't know it to look at them, but they are slugs. So they're sea slugs. They're not all nudibranchs, or not all sea slugs are nudibranchs, but all nudibranchs are sea slugs. There's different kinds of sea slugs. Nudibranchs are one division, and they live in water, and you can find them at low tide. And they are the most glorious colors and shapes. Some are like translucent, some are bright orange. They come in pretty much every color. They're all carnivores. They eat bryozoa or sea anemones. Um, and you can't show somebody a nudibranch without them going, "Wow!" Because they're just amazingly beautiful and stunningly gorgeous. They have gills on their backsides around their butts, and they look like these dainty feather lacy, things, and they're just incredible animals.
And you live near the ocean, right? I mean, you have access to these.
Yeah, in Seattle, we're right on Puget Sound, and so I can go right to the beach, just a few minutes away. And I do it all the time for low tide and go look for. Well, I look for everything, of course, but especially nudibranchs.
They're clearly your favorite. You can hear it in your voice. Uh, how did they become your favorite? Did you just is it just because they're beautiful to look at? Is it because there's something really fascinating about them that no other creature has?
Yeah, all the above. It's one of those things. Like I went to the beach as a kid, and we see sea stars and the typical things, but I never knew what a nudibranch was until I even moved to Seattle over a decade ago. And once you find out about them, it's like you're hooked because it's like they have a um um not a cult's not the right word, but they have a huge following. Like once you know a nudibranch, you're a fan. I mean, they're amazing to look at. They're hard to find. They're not always super abundant, so it's kind of like it's kind of like like looking for Pokemon. um, and their life histories are fascinating. Some of them, they're all hermaphrodites, and so they have very interesting sex lives. Some of them are cannibals. Some of them steal the stinging cells from anemones, and they ingest it into their own bodies, and then they have these finger-like serrata on their back, and that deters fish and other things from eating nudibranchs.
Sorry, they can absorb
Yeah,
what? Sorry, explain that again. They can do what?
they eat the sea anemones, and sea anemones have the stinging tentacles. So they
Right.
they eat the cells, and they go into their digestive system, and their digestive system actually runs up into these finger-like serrata on their backs. And so they steal them, and then they use them for their own. It's incredible.
So these things that they absorb from the sea anemones, if I'm saying that correctly,
Hmm.
uh, they act as a sort of venom.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah. I mean, they can't. Okay, there's one that
that's
can
wild.
actually hurt humans, but they can't hurt humans, but they can deter fish if they take a mouthful and get some stinging cells in their mouths. They're gonna spit them out again. Yeah,
I think
and
you're converting me.
they're
Because I
very
don't
cool.
know yeah, I don't know a lot. One of the reasons why I created this whole podcast was to, interview people, especially people I meet online, but, scientists, artists, historians, and things like that, and ask them the questions I've been wanting to pester them with on Twitter forever, including this one, and I honestly didn't know that about sea slugs.
Yeah, and I've started a new Twitter account called the Nudibranch Appreciation Society, and I'm just using that to tweet out stuff about nudibranchs. And then I've started a new section on my website, introducing a new nudibranch each week.
And these are nudibranchs that you find?
No, these are just ones that I started painting them, doing watercolors, at the beginning of the pandemic because it was just something soothing to do, and I accumulated quite a lot of nudibranch paintings, so I'm using those, to kinda introduce the nudibranchs from around the world.
Amazing, absolutely amazing. And so this is the Nudibranch Appreciation Society.
Mhm.
Now, you said earlier that nudibranchs are all sea slugs,
Yes, that's correct.
but not all sea slugs are nudibranchs.
Right, there are some other groups, there's some, like, the sea hares, the really giant ones that, like, look like bunnies, um, and there's several different orders. The taxonomy's changed, so my books are a bit outdated, so it's kind of all jumbled up right now. But yeah, there's different groups of sea slugs.
Well, that was actually my next question, which is how do you do your research?
Meticulously. I read a lot, so I have tons of reference books. But because taxonomy especially changes so quickly, there's some really good online resources, especially for nudibranchs, because there's worms, which is the World Registry of Marine Species, and that keeps an up-to-date database on all the current names. Because I have a giant nudibranchs of the world book, and when I look it up, half the time the names change. So yeah, it's hard to keep track. And there's also iNaturalist, which keeps track of all the different current names. Um,
Yeah,
yeah,
iNaturalist is really cool.
yeah, it's a great resource.
And do you collaborate with other people in the field? Do you connect with scientists or maybe post to Twitter sometimes when you're not really sure?
Oh yeah, definitely. I will. There's certain people I know on Twitter who like. There's a spider person. There's stream. Well, Marianne, I think you interviewed her.
I
um,
did.
um, yeah, there's different people that I know. If I have a question about something, Nudibranchs, there's Allison down in and Rebecca Fay down in California Academy of Sciences. But yeah, there's lots of Twitter people, and it's just easy to get an answer.
Very cool. And I know that another one of your favorite creatures is the dragonfly.
Hmm. Oh
Mhm.
yes.
Wanna tell me a little bit about the dragonfly?
I have It was when I think I was down in Eugene going to school. Eugene has a huge wetlands, and so I'd go out there and photograph dragonflies. And so I've just been enamored with them. They're kind of a gateway. Like you start with birds, and then you're like, oh, the dragonflies are kind of like birds, and so you start watching them, and then pretty soon you're like, oh, I got to learn all the species and everything about them. And then when I moved to Seattle, we're very lucky to have one of the world's leading experts on dragonflies in Seattle, Dennis Paulson, and he's often teaching classes and leading walks and stuff. So I got to know him, and pretty soon I was like watching dragonflies and learning everything about them. And then um, my peak moment was when I was in the arboretum here, and I saw a dragonfly I didn't recognize, and I took a picture, and I came back home and looked it up, and I sent it to Dennis, and I said, I think this is a four-spotted skimmer. He's like, you're right, it is. It's the first documentation in Seattle.
No way, that's cool.
Closest I've come to finding a new species, but good enough.
Okay, so, Kelly, can I just read an excerpt from your book?
Yes, of course.
Okay, so this is the chapter called Dragons in the City. Adult dragonflies have a number of ways of catching prey. They have spines lining their legs, and some dragons hold their legs down, creating a net like basket of legs and spines to catch prey. Other times, they catch prey with their feet. So, the question I had in regards to that was, do dragonflies do this in midair?
Yes, they do. They do most things in midair, including mating. But yeah, they have the best, among the best eyesight in the whole insect kingdom, and they're the best flyers, pretty clearly, hands down, I would say, because they can go backwards, forwards, up and down, and really, really fast. So that combination makes them really, really deadly in the air.
Yeah, dragonflies seem to always be flying. I've never been able to photograph one holding still.
There are a few. It depends on like darners hardly ever land except maybe when they're mating. But some, like the skimmers, will often find they like a perch, and they're kind of like birds that hawk. They'll sit on one perch and then go out and grab something and come back. Some of the meadowhawks do that. So if you can find their favorite perches, then you could get great shots of them. You just have to find those
Ah,
perches.
that's a pro tip, huh?
Yeah, yeah.
So what happens to them in the rain? How do they fly in the rain, or do they?
I don't think they do so much. What they tend to do, especially like when they're just emerging and they're still very, excuse me, tender, they will go fly into a forest area to find shelter. So yeah, they'll
Okay,
probably hide.
so they'll hide like under a leaf or a strong leaf or something.
Or just in the forest where there's fewer drops coming down.
Okay, okay. Interesting. So your book, Nature Obscura, a city's hidden natural world. When did you write this?
I started, oh gosh, about 3 years ago, and it took me about 3 years to, well, thereabouts anyway. So yeah, I was working on it for about 3 years.
Okay, and you have some really good illustration as well.
Yeah, that was the illustrator, Zoe Keller from Portland did those.
Okay, yeah, I wanted to give her a shout out too because the book cover is just absolutely beautiful.
Yeah.
And the book itself is so eloquently written, Kelly.
Well, thank
And I
you.
really like the format that you've chosen, which is essentially you break it up between seasons.
Mhm,
And some of the chapters are pretty much diary format, which what I like about how you've written this is that you've written it in such a way where it's half education and half very personal experience.
mhm.
And so I have a quick little question about that. What is your favorite season?
Oh, definitely fall.
Why?
I hate the heat of the summer as I'm sitting here sweating right now. And it's the time, it's like that time of transformation between the horrible summer and you get that nice relief of the cool weather. The fall leaves start to come down and change color. It's also a good time for slime molds and the like the shorebirds and all the marine birds start to come back. It's just really like a really magical time. It's very peaceful and pretty, and I like everything about it.
Actually, it's also my favorite season, so we can high five on that from afar. So the fall period, what's interesting is that I picked up a microscope last year, and so I started observing microscopic life and how it changes throughout the seasons.
Mhm.
And in the fall and in the spring, there's Signora, which is just one of my favorite pond creatures, I guess we could call them. And so I wanted to know in what transitions do you see when it comes to the creatures that live in an urban environment in the fall? What kind of transitions happen?
Um, well, that's interesting. I think I mentioned the birds, but there's a lot of you can always tell when fall is coming because the crows start to migrate to their roost. During the summertime, they stay near their nests. And the first sign of fall for me is usually when I look out the window at night because they go right over our house in Seattle. And it's just usually, a few here, and then their numbers keep growing and growing until it gets to be thousands of them flying over every night to go to the roost. That's a favorite, and also the like all the ducks and all those water birds start to arrive again. The ospreys go away, the swallows all go away, and then it's a really fun time to start looking in leaves because all the decomposers start, and the spiders come out, and it's the best time to dig around the leaves for everything that was kind of hiding when it was dry, like the woodlouse and centipedes and all the fun, things that come out in the fall.
Well, I'm actually glad that you mentioned spiders because you do have, I don't know if it's a I can't remember if it's a full chapter, but you did write about the fear of spiders,
Hmm.
which I found really fascinating because I was actually terrified of spiders until probably maybe it's only been 2 years now, where actually if I find a spider, it lives.
See, that's
You
good.
know?
I mean, it's not easy to overcome, but it's possible to overcome being scared of them.
Yeah, and how in your book you were saying that they don't really know yet what causes the fear of spiders or why we're scared of spiders, right?
Right. I mean, there's different theories, but if you see a kid, I mean, a young kid, they're generally not scared of spiders. They're curious, curious about them. It's usually something that's taught. But at the same time, it's like I've taught my daughter that spiders are really cool and interesting, and yet she still has nightmares about spiders. So it's an interesting dynamic where, what is going on in our heads? Who knows?
Yeah, I wonder if there's some sort of evolutionary, you know, cause behind it or something, Like
Yeah,
maybe that's why we're also scared of tigers or big bears or something.
right.
I wonder if spiders and snakes fit into that as well.
Possibly, but I mean, like I said in the book, at this point in time, it's detrimental because people crash their cars because they see a spider on their, visor, and
Yeah.
and I mean, we should be that scared of cars or dogs because they're much more of a threat to us as, as a modern human than a spider.
Exactly. Now, you mentioned the creatures that feed on rotting wood and things like that. What are some examples, and can you just, give us an idea of how to find them perhaps? Like, maybe take pictures or
Um, so things on rotting wood, it's very similar to going to a tide pool. I always take a little flashlight. I have like a little waterproof one because it's Seattle, it rains a lot. Um, and I would just find a good rotten log and just shine the light all over it and just be patient because if you go too fast, you're like, oh, there's nothing here. But these things are small, like centipedes and springtails, woodlouse. And I always like to find things in the ground and kind of look under them very carefully and always, put them back how you found them because it's a home for somebody. Um, but yeah, just poking around and looking under things. If there's some loose bark, kind of peek underneath it with your flashlight. Um, and yeah, just like look slowly because they're so tiny and they're so easy to overlook.
it must be a blast going on a hike with you.
I don't know. It's not a lot of hiking. It's more just crawling around.
Um, Now, because your book is about the city's hidden natural world, what kind of creatures can we find on really, in really urban environments, in like concrete?
Hmm.
What kind of creatures inhabit? Now, for most people who follow me, they know already that I've found hundreds of tardigrades and rotifers on my own balcony.
Hmm.
Can you think of other creatures that people could find on a concrete balcony or in the cracks between the sidewalk?
Oh yeah, I mean the sidewalk is a good one because there's often a lot of ants there, and then the ants will bring in like the flickers, because flickers, which are woodpeckers, so you think they'd be on a tree, but they're often seen on sidewalks, just poking into the cracks in the sidewalk, looking for the ants, which they eat. And there's always moss and lichens. Lichens grow in the weirdest places. You can find them all over tombstones and graveyards. And that's interesting because the tombstones actually mimic like rocky, bouldery fields and natural habitats. So the lichens are just like, oh, we like this. Um, and there's just tons of little invertebrates, like um, well, you mentioned the tardigrades and rotifers, and I don't even know them all yet. There's so many tiny creatures, and I'm still learning them too.
Do you have a microscope?
Yeah, I've got two. I've got a dissecting scope and then a actual microscope too. So yeah, I use those a lot.
What kind of stuff do you look at under your microscopes?
Everything. Any dead bugs that I find out in the yard, they always end up under the microscope. Mosses, lichens. When I learned how to identify lichens, you have to use a microscope to identify most of them. Um, Pond water, the mosses from my roof, which I find the tardigrades in, slime molds. Again, that's something you can have to identify under a microscope because the spores look different. Um, yeah, basically anything I put under my microscope.
You did mention in your book also that you built yourself a pond.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about that and what did you learn from that? Did you first of all, did you research how to construct pond or did you just like dig a hole?
No, I did research it, as part of my landscape architecture training to figure out how things
Of
are
course.
constructed. And we have a really good book here in the Northwest, about creating wildlife habitat. And so it had some excellent diagrams. So I tried to just like take everything, every piece of it, um, because you can create like a pond for fish, but that's not a good pond for invertebrates, which is what I really wanted to find. And so I dug it with different depths and different substrates and different sorts of edging, um, so it would be a good home for invertebrates.
Okay, and this is so that you can just study them?
Yeah, watch them and study them and just, create habitat. So, I mean, there's so few ponds and wetlands in the cities anymore. Everybody gets rid of them because they think they're going to be mosquito breeding grounds, or they're just too
Yes.
much work, or they just want fish, and fish eat all the invertebrates. So,
So what have you learned since you've had your pond?
so the very first time, and when we dug it and put the hose in it, and I was standing there. It was just barren. I mean, it was just all dirt around it with a few scraggly plants that I'd added. And I was just standing there, and all of a sudden, it's like pew pew pew, and I'm like, "What?" Things just hitting in the water. I didn't know what it was, and I looked closer, and it was they were back swimmers. They're like actively colonizing the pond as I stood there, and I didn't even.
So they just showed
Yeah,
up?
they just like because they fly, and I didn't realize that they flew.
Wow.
Like, and they just like shot out of the sky into the pond, and they started swimming around, and pretty soon, a few weeks later, I had a whole ton of babies swimming around in there. So, it did its job.
That's amazing. I was talking with Dr. Stephen Thackeray, and I'm not sure if you're familiar with him. He's an ecologist from the UK. And he was telling me that's exactly what he did. He constructed a pond and he said, I didn't have to do anything
Right.
for the creatures to come.
No, yeah, they just find it. It's incredible.
Do you have to maintain it?
Um, I do a little bit because somehow I got this invasive water fern in it, and it spreads over the. In fact, it's giving me headaches now. It's currently spreading right now. The pond's drying out, so I keep trying to scoop it out. And every time I think I've got it, it escapes and it just keeps spreading again. Um, but that's about all I do. I don't do a whole lot else. It's pretty self-sustaining at this point.
Very cool. And you're in Seattle. And so, how are the winters there?
Wet. We get a lot of drizzle. It depends on the year, but sometimes we'll get a lot of freezing days. Some once in a while snow, not a lot of snow, but Mostly just a lot of drizzle.
Because one of the things that really surprised me in your book was the mention of the hummingbirds in the wintertime, which I don't think I've ever seen hummingbirds, at least not in Canada in the winter.
No, the Anna's hummingbirds are a recent arrival, which is in just the last few decades, because of our own expansion and plants and feeding them. And they didn't used to come this far north, especially, and they didn't ever overwinter. And now they're all the way up to Canada, up to Vancouver, overwintering there.
Amazing. I hope they come here, but I also hope that they don't because that'll be like a sign of climate change or something.
Right.
So, which actually leads me to my next question. How do you find because you've been doing this for a while, do you find that things have changed?
Yes and no. Seattle is such a highly managed landscape. We have Lake Washington, which is the second largest lake in the whole state. But because it has a dam on it, it's managed for boat traffic. And so the water levels are w- in the natural world, they would be drying out during the summertime and really low during drought years. But instead, they're opposite. They go up higher in the summer, so because they want to raise the water levels because so much water is lost every time they open the locks to let the boats out. And so it's completely opposite. It's lower in the wintertime and then it's higher in the summertime. So it's hard to get a gauge on anything like that because it's like, well, this should be drier now. Well, it's,
Do you notice more or fewer creatures or anything like that?
no, again, it's very down to management. There are fewer dragonflies in the wetlands now, but a lot of that is because the plantings have become so tall that they're shading out the ponds. Um, and that's part of the management again.
Okay, that's just very curious. And lastly, in regards to your book, you did write a little bit about what kind of tools that you use. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about that? What kind of tools do you bring with you on a hike, for example?
So I always the first thing I say is you don't really need anything other than, your sense of curiosity because really to go out to be a naturalist, all you need is just your eyes and your ears and whatever senses you possess. Um, but the second thing I say is most important are good shoes, waterproof layers, because there's nothing worse than being out in the cold, windy with wet jeans. Um, and then my most frequently used tools are my my flashlight, which I've mentioned, and then the other tool that I never leave home without is my little hand loop. So it's a teeny tiny hand lens. It's like a magnifying glass, but it's really tiny and it's much more powerful than a magnifying glass. And you just hold it up. It's like, like when you go to the jeweler and they look at stuff with their jeweler. Yeah, it's the same thing. So you use that to look at slime molds or lichens or whatever else I find out in the field. Um, and then I usually carry some old like tins, like mint tins to collect things in, like if I wanna bring a slime mold back to try to identify it, or I find some dead bugs or whatever, just like little collecting tins. Um, and then my camera, of course, my camera and some different lights. But that's about all the essentials that I take with me, then everything else is just bonus stuff on top of that.
Do you get a lot of mosquitoes out there?
Sometimes there's a wetlands not far from my house, and yeah, there's certain times of the year where you don't wanna walk slowly through the wetlands.
Yeah, I was gonna say, do you bring a bug jacket during your expeditions out there?
No, I just mostly have a rain jacket. They're not that bad. It's generally speaking, in most places, mosquitoes are not that bad here. Not like, in Scotland or up north in Canada.
In
Yeah.
Canada. Really bad.
Yeah.
It's really bad. Yeah, I'm originally from Northern Ontario, so we have, the fly season, and then we have mosquito
Yeah.
season. So and then we have snow. So, I mean, that's life up here.
And mosquitoes aren't bad. We don't have hardly any midges or biting flies. We don't even really have ticks here. So it's pretty easy to go out here. There's not much that can, bother you.
Fascinating. That you're in a pretty interesting spot,
Yeah.
pretty interesting location.
Don't tell anyone.
How are things Yeah, well, too late now. Um, how have things been with the pandemic? How have you been?
Oh, terrible. First, it was fine because 'cause I'm like, "Oh, I got time to go out. We can go to the parks. We can go for walks because being outside is still fine." But then everybody else had the same idea. So
Right.
suddenly, all the places that I retreated to during a weekday morning to go look for slime molds or walk through the woods in peace is now like just stuffed full of people. So I've lost all my like little retreat places. And for some reason, everybody at home has decided that this is the prime time to do home improvement projects. So every time I try to go sit
Yes.
by my pond, there's like 5 major projects on my block alone. So somebody's doing siding today, there's another house adding a new extension, somebody else was tearing up their concrete in their backyard. It's just been like it's been
It's
awful.
yeah, it's terrible to live in an urban center when things like this happen.
Yes.
It's something that my partner and I are actually, considering perhaps moving to the country at this point. Is that something that's crossed your mind?
As a matter of fact, yes. Yeah, the our neighbors and even on the best of times, we have noisy neighbors. There's a contractor, there are people who play music. It's just and noise is my sensory issue. I can't handle noise very well. If it's quiet, I'm fine, but if there's noise, it just like debilitates my. I just can't do anything. Um,
Right.
so yeah, so we thought about, well, hey, maybe I'll just get a cabin somewhere and I can go there for the summer and then avoid all the noise. And then we're just like, no, I think we just have to move now somewhere where there's like 5 acres and a house and some sense of quiet.
I think there's gonna be a mass exodus from the cities actually in the next few years.
Yeah, I think that's already started.
Yes, yes, indeed. And so now I'm curious a little bit more about you. Other than nature, other than art and photography, what other interests do you have? Do you watch movies, for example?
I'm a huge anime geek. I do love anime movies, like all the Miyazaki films. I
I was just about to
Yeah,
say.
I mean that's all nature related too, though, so I guess that doesn't count. um, I started practicing Kendo at the beginning of the year, which is funny because I did it for 3 months in the dojo, and now I've been doing it all on Zoom. So it's a very interesting way to learn Kendo. Um,
Kendo is the art of what?
so it's a martial art, but it's the martial art of the samurai. So we fight with shinais, which are bamboo swords. Um, I'm a super beginner, so don't ask me too much about it. But yeah, so I'm learning how to do kendo, and it's a lot of
That's really
fun. Yeah,
cool.
it's really outside my comfort zone, but I loved it the first time I saw it. So
Is
I'm
it hard physically? Is it exhausting?
It is exhausting, but they say, like, the first time I went there that you do not have to be young, which I'm not, or super fit, that a lot of the practitioners are quite a bit older than I am, and you can do it until you're very old. So it's gentle, but it's also, yeah, it's very hard, physically. It's especially when you start wearing the armor, which I don't yet because I haven't got that far, but yeah, it's
Ooh,
yeah, it's very good.
that's gonna be cool. When you get to the armor and you get to
Right.
the weaponry, that's gonna be a lot of fun.
I know I just started to, get to hit people and then the pandemic happened and
Oh man. Yeah, I hear you. I do, well, before the pandemic, I was doing a lot of boxing.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so, it's that kind of, exertion and being able to hit a bag or being able
Right,
to spar with someone, it really releases something,
right.
right?
Right, and then kendo, you're supposed to yell. You have your kia, which is like, your warrior spirit, and so there's a lot of yelling, which is not something I do because 'cause I'm a total wallflower, and so it's it's
Oh,
very yeah, it's very far outside my comfort zone, but right before the pandemic, I was yelling.
well, that's
Yeah.
cool. Did you find that liberating as someone who doesn't normally yell?
Yeah, it was, yeah. It was very fun to, like, "Yeah!" and then charge at somebody and hit him in the head.
Well, I think what's really cool is that if you do end up moving out to the country, you can yell as much as you want.
Right? I mean, I could now, but
Well, I guess you could, yeah, but then, there would be consequences.
right.
So looking a little bit forward to the future here, what are your future plans?
Well, I'm working on a new book proposal, on Nudibranchs, which is, I know, shocking,
I'm
and
not shocked at
no.
all.
And then we have this Invertefest coming up this weekend. We've been working on that,
Yes.
expanding that every time. So basically, we started it. Has it been about a year now? There's 3 of us on Twitter, and we are all big invertebrate nerds, and we're always complaining that all the vertebrates get all the attention. They get all the airtime, all the, oh, everybody loves the tigers and the bears and all the boring stuff. And so we decided to start our own thing for invertebrates because not only, do we love invertebrates and they're fun, but they're incredibly important to the ecosystem. We would literally not be here without invertebrates. So we wanted to give them their own limelight. So we started this Invertefest. Basically, it was just a weekend where people everywhere just went out to find your local invertebrates, whether it's, bees or octopus or whatever, and share them on Twitter. And so it's been evolving a bit every time we run it. And this time we started doing it with having different scientists take over our Twitter account for a day and just kind of tweet about whatever they were working on or their study subjects. Um, and we did a couple like online Twitter interviews with different people, and then the big event is coming up again this weekend. So I do that, and then the Nudibranch Appreciation Society, and just working on my website and all the other stuff.
And just to clarify, when you say this weekend, because this is gonna be pre-recorded,
Right,
it is, the dates for Invertifest are what dates?
uh, August 21st to 23rd.
Okay, so that will have passed by the time this episode airs, but it is a yearly event, correct?
We're doing it quarterly, so about every 3 months we schedule a new one. So yeah,
Okay, so
so
people have to look forward to
yeah,
that.
definitely. And we try to do it year round
Okay.
because, of course, when it's winter here, it's summer in the southern hemisphere. And also because there are still cool insects and bugs and invertebrates that we can find even during the winter. So we want to, kind of challenge the perception that there's nothing to see in the wintertime. So, yeah, so we keep running
Give me
it.
an give me an example of that.
Uh, let's see. So in the wintertime here, the tides are low at nighttime. And so I like to go to the beach in the dark. Um, And when I go, I take a black light. And some of the organisms, like some of the sea anemones, they glow under the black light. So it's a lot of fun to go when you wouldn't think to go to the beach during like 10 o'clock at night when it's pitch black. Um, but it's kind of a different way to go see the beach with a black light. So it's fun.
That's ingenious, actually. Could I if I went to the East Coast, so let's say the Atlantic Ocean, so let's say the coast of Nova Scotia
Mhm.
or PEI or whatever, and if I brought a black light, are you saying that I could potentially see some
Oh
creatures
yeah.
on the beach?
Yeah, there's like, and it's just really random.
Hmm.
Like some sea anemones, like I saw these dog whelks and they had like this one little glowing patch on them, which I have no idea why. Um, yeah, just looking at, and some shrimp and some crabs and some do and some don't. And I have no idea why, but yeah, you can do it in your backyard too because there are some mushrooms that glow and some scorpions and just different things that glow randomly in the dark. Who knows why?
I am very motivated now to go get myself a black light. Do you have any recommendations?
Oh, no, I just got one online. It was just it looked like a
Okay.
flashlight, but it's just a black light. Yeah, people I don't know why people buy them, but there's tons of them out there.
Well, I heard that you can actually use them with rocks too.
Mm.
Rocks and minerals. Apparently, I don't know, you can make them shine and you can tell what kind of mineral it is. I don't know a whole lot
Oh,
yet,
that's
but
cool. I haven't tried that
it's on
yet.
the list.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, speaking of which, what's on your list of things that you wanna learn? Because it seems that you're always learning something new.
I've been really interested lately in folklore, and so I'm interested in the history of some of the different beliefs of animals and plants and things we think are silly today. It's like, well, how could you think that a manatee was a mermaid? But there's a really interesting, like background to either a misinterpretation of or mistranslation of something or something that somebody saw and described it, but the person who drew it hadn't seen it before, so they just took their best stab at it. It's just a really interesting dynamic of the folklore of nature, and our dismissal of it is just silly, but there's often a lot of truth behind it, like the belief of different plants that could heal, and it's just I don't know, it's just very interesting to me. I like that bridge of folklore and nature.
That sounds fascinating, honestly. That would actually make for a good book.
Yeah, there's something my next book is going to have something to do with that.
Oh, okay.
I've got
Well, I definitely wanna have you back on when for because now you've got 2 books that you're kind of working
well,
on,
there's
right?
actually a third one too, but
What's the 3rd one? Tell me
the
about it.
third one is, more focused on slime molds again, but
Okay.
much more in depth. There's some different aspects that I touched in on the chapter, in my book that I got really, really obsessed with, and I wanna when we can travel again someday, dive into those a bit deeper.
So that is actually my last question, which is where do you wanna go once you're able to travel again? What kind of place where do you wanna go explore around the world?
I wanna go back to Finland. I love yeah, I
Finland!
love Finland. I've been there 3 times now, and I love Finland, and Scotland's my second favorite, but all those northern landscapes, I don't know what it is, but I'm completely enamored with the lochs and the birch forests and the heaths and all those and the fjords, of course. This is something really magical about those northern landscapes, and there's just so much I haven't seen yet, and I'd like to go back and really explore. It's just fascinating. I mean, Finland's cold. It's
Yeah.
I mean, it's a winter country, but I went up north and I saw the most amazing dragonflies there. And like, how do they live? It's just such a short summertime and such a long, long cold winter. It's incredible that
Are
they
you
are so
well,
successful.
so sorry, I was gonna ask if you're in contact with people in Finland, like, do you have, like, a naturalist network where you guys can exchange information until you get to go back?
No, I have a friend who lives there. I wouldn't call her a naturalist. But no, there's a few people on Twitter, Finns on Twitter that I've connected with a little bit. I'd love to meet more, but no, it's hard to learn about Finland because most of their books don't get translated. So there's a lot of I went to the bookshop there and like, oh, there's a whole book on parasites, but it's not been translated to English. And I
Oh.
can't. I mean, I know a tiny bit of Finnish, but not enough to read a book, especially about parasites.
Wow. Listen, Kelly, this has been amazing. It's been fascinating not only to be able to ask you questions, it's one of the things that I've always vowed, which is to never be afraid to contact one of your favorite authors and to, be able to ask them questions. And I love what you've written. And I'm really, really looking forward to your future novels or future
Yeah,
books, I should say.
both.
Um, I did see, however, that you are writing a fiction as well.
Yeah, I wrote a novel about a pirate naturalist. I'm revising it, and I've already written a half of a sequel to it too, because I just got it into my head and I just wrote it. It was weird.
It's just wild, man, just wild. Honestly, I cannot wait. I'm gonna have a whole section on my bookcase just for your work. So, thank you. Thank you for, coming on the podcast. Thanks for answering all of my curious questions about nature and creatures. And just to tell everybody that they can follow you on the web. Can you give us your website again?
Yeah, it's metrofieldguide.com.
Okay, and on Twitter, it's Kelly Brenner,
Yep.
correct? All right. So, yeah, thanks for joining me, and I hope that, you'll return.
Yeah, and thank you for having me. That was fun.
My pleasure.